Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Dan. Welcome you to another segment of Destination Health Podcast, Finding Function in a Dysfunctional World. I'm really excited today. I have a really good friend of mine. This is about 9 months in the making, this podcast. I want to welcome onto the podcast Dr. Shay. Sam, it was just one thing after another. We had it settled, we had dates and so forth, and it just didn't work out. But I am very excited to have my good friend, Dr. Sam, on. Dr. Sam, how are you today?
I'm doing good. It's good to finally see you in a recording context versus sending you frowny face emojis over Facebook. True story. To say, like, when are we doing the podcast frowny face emoji? So we've only canceled 4 times already. What's going on?
Yeah. It just wasn't working out. So anyway, I'm very excited to have Dr. Sam on. Devoted his life to health and science, learning how to heal himself by cross-training across multiple health disciplines, functional medicine. He's dedicated his life to alleviate physical, biochemical, emotional suffering, to help others. He's a chiropractor. He has certifications in acupuncture, functional neurology, genetic analysis, functional medicine. He's one of my heroes, even though I'm like 100 years older than he is. Love having Sam on. He deals with a lot of people, anxiety, hormone imbalances, gut issues, poor sleep, stress. Sam, you put together the 10 pillars of health. We'll discuss that a little bit later on. But today we're going to talk about how to ID your ideal diet. Say that 10 times really fast.
How to determine your ideal diet, right?
How to determine your ideal diet. Before we start, let's talk about you. What got you into the chiropractic, into the nutrition? I know that you had sugar cravings. You like to play video games and stuff like that. What happened to you? What was that like?
So two things on the bio, just to distill it down. One, I'm a mutt. I'm just a combination of multiple different disciplines. I'm just a health mutt. And a nut, health mutt nut. And most importantly, I also do stand-up comedy as a hobby.
I was going to get into that at the end because you just
the most important thing, regardless of the 24 letters at the end of my name, it's the stand-up comic that's clearly the most important here. And I do have clips. If people put my name, Dr. Sam Shay, into plus comedy into YouTube, they'll find some of my recorded bits. I do a mean David Attenborough. I pretend to be David Attenborough narrating a wildlife special inside a Boulder coffee shop. It's a lot of fun. My history of how I got into all this is it's a very common story arc, a very common narrative of the wounded healer. Though the details differ from person to person, the arc is the same or sounds the same. My journey started at age 6 when my parents went through a horrific nuclear divorce, to which me and my sisters were caught in the blast radius. And that triggered severe crippling insomnia from age 6 to 18, where I had onset insomnia. I got interrupted, my sleep got interrupted. I woke up exhausted to the point where it actually stunted my growth. So I should be 4 to 6 inches taller based on my foot size, hand size, and my father's height. But I never had a growth spurt because of the insomnia during my formative years from 6 to 18.
Very important to have sleep when you're in the growing years. Yes,
absolutely. And there's some weird, like my muscle density is I'm basically built like a tree. Like if I work out, I don't get bigger. I just kind of get denser, like bark.
You get wide. Right.
Well, not wide. No, I get denser. Like the muscles don't get bigger. They just like a tree bark or something. I don't know how to describe it. And because I should be stretched out another 4 to 6 inches because of the sleep severe insomnia. Additionally, what happened was that I had a coffee habit at age 6 to stay awake for school. Wow. My diet was, ramen noodles and sun-kissed tuna. We assume there's tuna in there. We hope. Our tuna-like substance, spaghetti. I had fast food, and my parents didn't know any better. They were psychiatrists, and they were the idea of what health food was not what health food as we know it now. Additionally, right. I was had a lot of assaults in school. I don't call it bullying. The difference between bullying and assault, to me, appears to be bullying is if you're punched in the face and you're under 18 and still in school, that's called bullying. But if you're punched in the face and you're over 18 and outside of school, it's called assault. So that's the only difference I know of.
Right.
So I was also gaslit and ignored and all this nonsense. And I developed, to cope, a severe video game addiction and sugar addiction on top of all that, plus mood, depression, and a lot of physical pain, particularly in my spine from being attacked from behind. And I thought that was normal.
Right.
And there's just all sorts of terrible family politics of one parent weaponizing the child against the other, and then basically being tossed back in the other direction, try to harm the other. It was just awful. So I decided as a teenager that I really had to take control of my health, or I was on a fast track to self-annihilation. And the book that I read that put me on the track to natural medicine. Now, I knew I was going to be a doctor at age 6 because my parents were doctors and my grandfather was a very, very famous gastroenterologist.
Yes.
The founding director of the Fels Cancer Research Center at Temple University. And ironically, he died on the operating table under the knife of a colleague who the misdiagnosed medical malpractice and misadventure. They thought his unrelenting claudication was due to a reflex, quote unquote, reflex arc from the gallbladder affecting his heart, when it was actually just a giant coronary. Died on the table from a coronary. And my grandfather published like 300 articles. This peak of his career was when Sputnik launched. And at the time, suddenly the government had money for science. Just poof, money for science. And so my father recalled how in the 50s, Grandpa Harry could just write a little letter to the whatever government department, says, hey, I need such and such amount for such and such experiment, and you get a check in the mail the next week. And then he wrote over 300 papers. I mean, it's just prolific.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to be a doctor, but I made a hard shift into natural medicine because my parents were wanting to drug me into submission with antidepressants, and
that's their training, and that's how they deal with stuff.
And it's the training, and and for a period of time I did go on some antidepressants and a sleep medication, and was able to get off of them 3 years later in college after I learned how to what whole foods were, what meditation was, what breathing techniques were, how to deal with stress, body work, and also being a completely different environment, getting out of the toxic environment, which is probably the single largest variable, breathing techniques aside, and also learning how to help my own sleep. So it started with a book when I was 16 called Dr. Jensen's Guide to Better Bowel Care. And I also had severe constipation for 12 years, where I couldn't go except once every 3 to 5 days. And that was called normal in my family. And, I'll spare everyone, the details on, poop. I'm sure someone else has already covered it on another podcast.
We'll do gut health next time.
Okay. All right. So lucky. Can't wait. Everyone's just scheduling it in their calendars. I can feel it. So that's what started my journey into natural medicine, was to dig myself out of my own hole. And that's the narrative of the wounded healer. So it just went through. When I went to college, I focused on pre-med and then a holistic health practitioner degree in the evenings and weekends, and started, meditation, breathing technique organization. I just focused completely on health and natural health and science, plus sort of like a writing minor when I was in college. And I just had a very different experience in college. I was super focused on just trying to figure it out. Then I went to chiropractic school and really focused on, I remember my very first weekend of my very first trimester, I was in a weekend seminar with Dr. Wally Schmidt. And I just kept taking weekend seminars, 2 to 3 a month for over 3 years, just kept. It was neurology, it was nutrition, it was adjusting, it was physiology, it was rehab, it was all, learn as much as I possibly can. And then I really got heavy into neurology. and then it just goes on from there.
Yeah. And the reason why I had you go through this, I mean, I know your story. We're friends. So, you know, my story, I know your story. And it's the wounded healer. There is that arc. So thank you for being vulnerable. I wanted to do this because for those listeners out there, there's hope, right? Because when you're going to see Dr. Sam or I, there's hope, right? No matter how bad or how whatever you think it is, whatever perception you have, there is hope that there's something that's better on the other side. And it's definitely something that you have to look into what Dr. Sam and I do. So thank you very much for being vulnerable.
There's two asterisks I'll put on that.
Go ahead.
With the wounded healer, there's also usually a priority of who one helps as a way, for lack of a better term, to heal the quote karma that caused the wounding in one's own life.
Right.
And I'm no exception to that. So the two primary people I serve, and obviously I help other people too, but the primary people I serve are moms and entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because my mother, who was primarily raised me during the most formative years, she was a mompreneur who was highly stressed out, extremely unhealthy, and by her own admission, made very bad decisions on my behalf that created lasting harm. Now, spoiler, she and I have a wonderful relationship now. It's taken multiple decades of healing and growth, and we talk to each other regularly, and we look forward to seeing each other when we do visit. And I focus on helping moms and entrepreneurs because, one, if I help mom, I help like the family. If I help entrepreneurs, I help society. And that's kind of a general by thinking about it. But the other main reason I do it is to help some future version of me as a child by helping a mom and an entrepreneur have the support they need in order to help their mindset, their handset, their heart set, so that they make the best decisions for their family. And that child, that avatar of that child I was, now has a happy, fulfilling life with happy, fulfilled parent or parents. And that heals the quote karma. You know, I pay it forward as opposed to shaking my tiny fist at the universe and how uniquely unfair it was growing up.
Right.
So that's part of the wounded healer narrative.
It makes you a more effective clinician to help people out, and you have great relationships now, and that's all good. So thank you for your share with that. You know, that is definitely you know, being very vulnerable, and we make it a very safe space to talk about different types of things here on this podcast. So, Dr. Sam, how do you identify that ideal diet for a specific, unique individual? Because not everybody's different. My diet's different than your diet. Your diet's different than mine. What does that look like? How do we get there?
Well, funny you ask, because I have an infographic I can share.
Let's share the infographic. Let's go for it. I love it.
So, and for people just listening, I'll be able to describe what's being shown on screen here. And this image is also available.
Dr. Sam, I do want to know, this is the first person on my podcast after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of podcasts that they have the infographic. So I love it. It's all good.
Well, you are not the first person to say that. When I'm on Summit podcast, I'm like, you have a PowerPoint, what? No one's done that. Like, welcome to Alpha Nerd. You know, this. So my nerd is showing. Anyway, so what's on screen here is a pyramid, and it's the 5 layers of an ideal diet. And the foundation is genetics. Now, then the next layer is called the therapeutic layer. Third layer up, getting smaller as it goes towards the top, is personal preference. Then the next one up is access. And the final one at the top, the smallest, is earth. Now, those are the 5 layers of how to determine your ideal diet. Genetics is the foundation. It's the platform of which your optimal health and performance is based on. And genetics is everything from determining, are you genetically keto, genetically paleo, genetically Mediterranean, or genetically high carb, and the shades of gray in between. And there's genetics tests now to determine, are you keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb? Genetically, you can also look at trigger foods. So for example, are you genetically vulnerable to caffeine-induced anxiety or depression? That's a thing. Not
It
only is
is.
it a thing, I have the thing
You're right.
badly. So remember, 6 years old, drinking coffee to stay awake so I can struggle through another day of gaslighting and physical abuse at school.
Mhm.
I was drinking coffee. Now, sadly, the coffee would give me an energy jolt, but it also triggered more anxiety and depression. And so for
Right.
people who are trying to suck back as much coconut laced coffee in the morning, thinking it's good for them, are you confusing energy for anxiety? Are you confusing the
Right.
energy for anxiety? And so some people like me, I was kidding myself. I thought I had energy, but really it was just high
Mhm.
anxiety. The other thing that the genetics can tell you is, are you vulnerable to other trigger foods such as histamine intolerance?
Mhm.
And that is massive for people. Histamine is a very popular topic these days,
Mhm.
rightly so. To see if people, so people, how would you know if people have histamine intolerance? I'll give you one example. There's the obvious stuff like the runny nose and the hives and the skin stuff. Let's talk about some of the subtle things. How many people, are you listening to this and do you have a layer of water weight covering your
Mhm.
body? And no matter how much you exercise, you can't get rid of that water weight.
Mhm.
And that is a layer of inflammatory water weight. That's a layer of
Right.
inflammation that could be triggered either from lots of inflammatory processes in the body,
Right.
foods, whatever it is, but it could also be a special branch of inflammation called histamine.
Mhm.
And so for people to understand, genetics, when we look at genetics, we have to think I study evolutionary biology intensely as a hobby, because when in doubt, I always trace back to try to figure
Mhm.
what's going on. So let's talk about histamine in that context. When a bee stings your arm, it doesn't inject a half quart of water into your arm.
Right.
It puts a little bit of venom, and then your body has a histamine response to
Mhm.
flood the venom with water to do what? Dilute the venom so it doesn't erode and corrode your tissues. Now, trade-offs, genetics trade-offs, that's why we have genetic variability. If you have a high histamine response, you will flood lots of water and
Mhm.
your arm will blow up and swell up, meaning that you will reduce the possibility that the venom will erode and corrode arteries, nerves,
Mhm.
muscle tissue, etc. But the trade-off is you might choke off arteries, nerves,
Because of the inflammatory reaction. Right.
exactly. And then the other side of the coin is that if you have a low histamine response, then you will not risk blocking or occluding or compressing arteries, nerves, joints, but you do risk getting more damage from the venom. So this is the trade-off nature plays.
Mhm.
So how does it relate now to modern day? Well, if you are genetically vulnerably high to histamine, which would be useful in an evolutionary environment where you've got lots of spiders, snakes, bugs, scorpions, etc., to help so you don't die from a venom injection, reduce the possibility of that. What happens is you eat things that are high in histamine, and food can either have high histamine, trigger histamine release in the body, or block the enzyme that breaks down histamine. Those are the three ways foods can affect histamine levels. Think of it as like a slow moving bee sting that spreads through the whole body. And
Mhm.
you get basically this global histamine response where you have this washed out layer of water weight on your whole body. So that's how histamine can create this layer of water weight across your musculature. And
Mhm.
if you know that it was histamine and instead you were just trying to starve yourself more, have less food and work out more, you're not actually going in the direction you need to deal with the root issue. So genetics is really the foundation, and one of the most important pieces is actually the keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb. Because if you are eating congruently with that, then everything else can fall into place and you just zhuzh around the edges. For me, I was eating the perfect Portlandia Mediterranean diet. I knew the names of my farmers and their chickens, and the quinoa was raised by left-handed monks and picked on the full moon and whatever. And sung in low tones as they watered the plants, all those things. And I was still having digestive problems, embarrassing gas, gas that was so bad it would kill flies, melt paint, and empty yoga rooms. And when I did my genetic carb tolerance test, it turned out that I actually had the carb tolerance of an Inuit, of an Aborigine, Native American, very, very low carb, historically low carb individuals. And within 1 week of changing my diet to my actual carb tolerance, the digestive problems over 20 years went away. Not just the gas, but these, rapid energy up and down, up and down. And there's also people who I test that are genuinely high carb. And these include athletes who were keto shamed. They were keto shamed into doing keto. And one guy I know was like basically fainting on the tennis court when he went keto. And he just kept keto gaslit by his keto buddies. But when I ran his carb tolerance test, he was a absolute high carb, no question or doubt. And when I told him this, he was so relieved because he just like the keto thing was like killing him. But he was just been dealing with all this keto shaming, keto gaslighting. And so I come from a very long background of trying all the diets. And then I come to realize, you know what? There are people, there's a spectrum, and you can actually test for it now. And the test is unique. It's not a 23andMe or Ancestry variant.
That was my question. It has nothing to do with that, right?
No, absolutely not. There's a three-dimensionality to genetics analysis almost no one knows about. It's called copy number analysis, copy number variant. It's the number of duplicates of the gene, not the variation of the individual gene. So think of this gene as like the number of cannons lining the fort. So there's the cannon that shoots out the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. If I have one copy, it shoots out 1x amount of enzyme. If I have 10 copies, it shoots out 10x the amount of enzyme per, whatever milliliter of saliva. So it's a linear relationship. So the people with very low copy numbers can't tolerate high carbs. People with high copy numbers can absolutely tolerate high carbs. And it's not about the variant. It's about the number of duplicates. And you can't get that data through 23andMe and Ancestry. It's a completely separate
It's a separate test,
separate swab, separate lab, separate everything. So I know 23andMe is like super popular, but it's not everything is locked up in that type of analysis. So that's the genetics layer. By the way, the histamine analysis and the caffeine, that is variant analysis, but the carb one is a copy variant analysis. The therapeutic layer is where functional medicine comes in. That is identifying what is going on with your body now that has a specific nutritional need or needs that you functional testing to unearth, is there a deficiency here? Is there an excess there? Is there toxicity there? Is there an infection there? Whatever it may be. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road with, I bet, a bunch of people listening and watching today. How many people here have tried a diet and then it worked and then it stopped working?
It stops. It'll work for a month or two, if that, and then it stops.
Right. And they go from one, I call them serial monogamal dieters. They come from one, they're married to one diet to the next, to the next, to the next.
And they think that they're doing good because they're like, oh, maybe I lost 8 pounds on this diet, but then you know what? I gained 2 or 3, maybe I lost 12 or 15, and then I gained 4 or 5, So yes.
Here's what I figured out. People can have what I call metabolic barbed wire wrapping their genetics. Right? What do I mean by that? If someone is genetically keto, we're going to talk about both extremes, keto and high carbs. So let's start with keto, metabolic barbed wire. Genetically keto, yet you metabolically have a problem with your gallbladder or pancreatic lipase or fat absorption or your carnitine shuttle or your mitochondria is busted and you can't either digest, absorb, shuttle, or use fats properly, eating a higher fat diet because you're genetically keto is going to feel awful because you've got this barbed wire of something wrong with your metabolism that you can't eat fat, even though your body genetically is like, we need the fats. So if you eat high fat, you're going to feel off because you got this metabolic barbed wire. But if you eat low fat, your genetics like, what are you doing? So that's one example. Then we go to the high carb example. Say you're genetically high carb, but you have a candida infection or any other infection blooms off of higher carbs. So you eat higher carbs that are matching your genetics, but it's going to bloom the infection, making you feel awful. And if you say, oh, I'm going to go anti-candida and I'm going to go like super low carb and all that, and you just feel awful, and you say, oh, it's all the die-off. Well, maybe, but it also is likely your genetics are like, what are you doing? This is not how we're supposed to eat. And so that's metabolic barbed wire from the high carb perspective. So what do? Is we run functional testing, all of the things, mitochondria testing, gut testing, hormone, blood, whatever.
Right.
And you figure out what's going on in you so that you can defang the barbed wire.
Right.
And you may have to do one diet therapeutically temporarily while you're defanging the barbed wire, and then switch to a more fully genetically congruent diet.
Right.
So the multi-phase approach, and that's why one diet won't work permanently for the long term for a lot of people, because they haven't done it in the proper order, because they haven't banged the metabolic barbed wire first. The next layer would be any questions, comments, anything on that?
No, that. I love the barbed wire analogy, defanging it. I'm in awe. I'm taking notes, by the way. So for all of the listeners here today, if you're not taking notes, run, stop this right now. Run, get your pen and paper. I got my pen. I got my paper. Take notes, because these are truth bombs. These are clinical pearls that Dr. Sam is sharing with us right now. I love it.
Thank you. So the third layer is preference. Now, preference is what you grew up with, what culturally defined, and what's religiously defined. Now, there's also some genetics of preference, and there are genetics panels that look at, are you super taster for bitter? Are you, are you more prone to sugar consumption than another person? There's definitely a genetic component there. But preference is really about, I can design the perfect diet, but if you don't eat it, what's the point? So we have to take into account personal preference. Now, it doesn't mean you get to say, well, I prefer the most bougie Kit Kats ever.
Right.
And I need 3 a day, topped with the Snickers, melted slightly. No, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, I was ready for you to sit there and say you're going to put some marshmallows on it. They got to be,
but if you put between 2 pieces of kale, it's healthy, right?
Yeah, sure.
Don't make everything healthy. So one of my favorite Jim Gaffigan jokes is that, oh yes, a wrap, because if you roll your food, there's less calories.
Yeah.
So, but by the way, if people do want, I model my own personal comedy style. I take a lot of, not full, but a lot of inspiration from Jim Gaffigan, because he does clean, observational, self-deprecating comedy.
Right.
And he's super family friendly. He's very funny. He's very likable. I encourage everyone to look up Jim Gaffigan. That's my personal preference. That's how I shoehorn preference into back to preference. Okay, there we go. So did it work? So for preference, we have to take seriously people's religious, cultural, and family upbringing. And because I've come across clinicians who are kind of, I wouldn't call it cruel, but just kind of unfeeling about the whole thing. And we want this to win. So we take that into account, preference. Then we have access. This is where things get tricky. So access is, do you actually have the time, the resources, the logistics to source, shop, pay for, bring back, cook, eat, clean, reset, consistently healthy, high quality food that you uniquely need based on your therapeutics, your genetics, and personal preference.
Right.
And when it changes when you travel, it changes if you're socializing, it changes if you're in a food, where you are in the world. Not everyone lives, near a farmer's market surrounded by organic farm. If you live, like, access is a real issue. Some people, people are like, well, they can just order in all the stuff. It's like, well, maybe. I think that access is, particularly if you're dealing with entrepreneurs and they travel a lot, or they rush, or people have got like a bunch of kids, or they're caring for an elderly family member that has very strict food restrictions or preferences, or a young child with equally strict, there has to be some allowance and some strategy about how can we increase access
Mhm.
From just a very basic example, if people are concerned about food prices, which are at the time of this recording going up,
Going up.
one of the best ways to save a lot of money is to get a chest freezer and find a. Now I'm just speaking from the paleo lens because
Right.
that's what I eat. Is you bulk order, you find a pasture fed and finished distributor of cattle or whatever, and you get a quarter cow or a half cow delivered, and you pay like what, depending on the butcher and everything, all these other things, it could be anywhere from like $8.50 to $13 a pound, but that's for everything. That's like half of it's going to be ground beef, but then the other stuff is like bolars and steaks and sirloins and chuck roasts and all the rest of it. And you save literally thousands of dollars if you were to price out all those individual cuts of meat for whether it's 100 pounds, 200 pounds, etc. So that's one example to handle access. And then people can bulk buy in certain things, join co-ops, etc. Then the last layer is earth, and that is how your diet affects, by your current understanding, your politics, your economy, and your environment. Now you'll notice I said your understanding of
Your perception of it. Yes.
Because people's perceptions differ. We don't need to go into further detail on that. We just will acknowledge that people's perceptions differ, and leave it at that. And what people have said to me is, well, that's the most important layer. And I say, no, it isn't. Genetics is the most important layer.
Why do people say that's the most important layer?
Because they are making a claim that I must sacrifice myself, and by proxy, everyone else should, in order to preserve some element of politics, environment, or the economy to some grander vision of which I am viewed in simplified terms as a parasite. And that's really what those people are saying. And my take on that is, okay, the first thing to do is find out what your genetics are and what your unique ideal diet is, and then you adapt your wider concerns to that.
Right. So I agree.
For example, I gave a talk to a group of 400 people, half of whom were diehard vegans, like not vegan wannabe vegans, diehard vegans. And the talk was ending the food war, how to find peace and common ground between vegans and paleos. Right. And what I said was like, okay, it was a 2-hour talk, and I can't distill 2-hour detail and nuance into a 2-second soundbite, but I'll do my best. I told the paleots is, look, you are responsible for minimizing the damaging effects on all parts of factory farming, factory cattle farming, and reducing all of the horrors therein, and encourage through economy of scale, pasture fed and finished, farm, like all of these different types of, okay, you handle that. The vegans, you guys handle GMOs. Okay, that way we can be on the same team handling different parts of a related problem, and we stop fighting each other and so put our efforts to helping fighting the better, bigger cause. And that's what I'm talking about. People can have differing viewpoints and different needs on their diet and still work in a way that can support whatever their larger vision is for their politics, their economy, and the environment.
Right.
Without immolating oneself nutritionally.
Right.
So
I love that. I love how you kind of molded that. That's great.
Thank you. So those are the 5 layers of how to determine your ideal diet. Genetics is the foundation. You find the therapeutic layer to see if there's any metabolic barbed wire. You hold, into account your personal preferences and figure out how you can adapt and improve and expand your preferences, by cooking. Like people who hate bitter foods, there's 4 different methods identified to decrease the taste of bitterness in foods. So people who avoid bitter foods, they avoid cruciferous vegetables, for example, and those are kind of important. So you have to change your willpower. A lot of people avoid bitter foods because they have aviation themed childhood food trauma. here comes the plane,
Yeah. I hated that, by the way, just to let
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, so
I wasn't happy unless it didn't have macaroni or homemade managota or lasagna. I didn't want to have anything else.
exactly. So there are ways to not force your willpower, but to control your environment, including your culinary environment, to make foods that you would otherwise find intolerable more palatable and increase your preference ranges. And then be strategic and find support to increase your access, and then adapt your wider concerns to everything beneath the pyramid. And that way you can live a congruent diet that serves all the layers, including the society at large.
So, what are your outcomes when you do this? I'm sure they're extremely successful.
Yeah, well, number one, the outcomes are the following. People save a tremendous amount of money because they're no longer dancing around with Band-Aid supplements based on an incongruent diet. They're not developing diet-related health problems.
Right.
They're also not making bad decisions because they're hangry, fatigued, or just generally icky from an incongruent diet. Additionally, they're going to put on an additional 5 extra years of healthy life. And when I say that, I'm looking at my own father who's going through dementia. This is a man who has 2 doctorates, almost a third, written 2 books, has a MacArthur Genius Award to his name, and can barely remember what day it is or what time it is or where anything is left in the house.
Right.
And another term for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia is type 3 diabetes.
Type 3 diabetes. Yep.
Sounds diet related to me. And the AARP, according to 2021, we're recording this in 2022, the average cost of memory care in the United States annually, according to them for 2021, was $83,320. $83,320. So I tell people, if you figure out your ideal diet, you're going to, over the long term, save at least 50 grand just by avoiding unnecessary, supplements that don't apply, that are just Band-Aids for bad diet, other health issues. But 83 grand a year, there's your 50 grand saved right there. You're also going to make more because you're going to make better decision making because you're not hangry, foraging for food. Then you also get better longevity. But the other thing I think is most concrete for people is that they're actually going to get about 50 minutes of high quality time of their day back. And here's what I'm talking.
That's significant. You're going to get 1 hour a day back.
I say 50. The reason I say 50 is for this, is that based on, quote, interruption science, which is a thing, interruption science, every distraction from a focused task takes on average 23 minutes and 15 seconds to come back to full focus.
Come back to it. 23
minutes, 15 seconds on average. Now, how do I get to 50 minutes? Well, if I forage for food because I'm eating incongruently and I'm just snacking, or I'm looking and checking the fridge, things didn't move around to a different shelf magically between now and when I checked last time. If I forage twice a day, and I forage for about 2 minutes, I'd walk over, check the fridge, whatever, and then come back. It takes me about 23 minutes to recover. That's 25 minutes per forage. Do it twice a day. There's your 50 minutes. So if you know your ideal diet, you're going to get back, I estimate, 50 high quality minutes a day. So you got your 5 extra years, your 50,000 extra dollars, and your 50 extra minutes of quality time a day. Those would be the outcomes just from a meta level. And then from just a physical health level, if people are eating congruently, then they're going to drop they're going to drop the excess water weight. Now, this is a big asterisk. Maybe many reasons people are carrying water weight, the therapy going in, we're just going to check our therapeutic diet, do a couple of labs and snip off defang. It's going to be great. That may be really complicated for a lot of people. Like there may be a lot of fangs on that barbed wire.
Right.
And so it's not going to be an overnight, poof, and we're done. It's for some people it will be, but going through that process of coming to the ideal diet, you can normalize your body weight, get your energy back, restore digestion, lift up brain fog, all these other things very much on the menu, to experience, when you dial in your ideal diet.
So let me ask you a question, because you and I are both clinicians, and we were talking about being a clinician before we came on the air today. Tell me, what are some of the patient struggles that you see? Because a lot of my patients, they struggle with this. What are some of the patient struggles that you see, and how do you help them overcome it when you're doing the 5 layers of your ideal diet?
Well, there's a mourning period for some of them when I
Yep.
tell that they can't. The trigger foods can be a real piece of work for people. Like if some people are genetically incongruent with gluten, like they're at serious risk for celiac, or they've got the gene for lactose intolerance, or but the hard ones, like everyone kind of culturally knows at this point, like gluten and dairy maybe not be the best, but and so they kind of already have the buildup. They have kind of a background awareness of it. But if I tell them that they as an individual, and this is not everybody, but as an individual, they can't do caffeine, it's like they turn into a gremlin, and and then like it's really difficult for them conceptually to give it up. Now, good news is there's lots of other things you can do that aren't caffeine based that can support the adrenals instead of squeeze as much cortisol out of them like caffeine does. So they go through a mourning period of caffeine. The people that are genetically incongruent with alcohol that can't metabolize. I practiced in New Zealand for 8 years, and alcoholism is basically the national sport next to rugby. And getting people off of alcohol is, I wrote a blog post on what to tell your friends when you have to stop drinking alcohol, but they don't want you to. Right. Like that came from working with a client who wanted to give up alcohol, knew she had to, but she was scared because she's afraid she would lose her friends. And I said, well, you're going to find out real quickly who your real friends are, won't you? Yeah. And she kind of nervously laughed. And then she came back when I saw her the next time. I said, so how'd it go? And she said, well, a friend of mine who we go out to have drinks every Friday for years and years and years. When I told her I was stopping drinking, her friend on the other line went dead silent and then said, call me back when you start drinking again, and hung up on me. Wow. True story. Talk about some peer pressure there when it comes to that, because I find the same thing. There's this mourning period. There's anger that's associated with the mourning period. There's some hatred towards me. Oh yeah, that's fun. Because kill the messenger. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Let's do that. Because when you sit there and you say something, it's based upon science and blood works. Dr. Sam, I get this all the time. Not all the time, but a fair amount of time where I have to give up what? Because of what? Yeah. And it's very difficult. I have a program ready to go for somebody. They haven't come in for 3 weeks because giving up alcohol is something that they need to do. Their liver enzymes are high and they're in their mid 40s because of the alcohol. And it's very difficult for that conceptual stuff where they have to give up something, right? The worst one, the most challenging one I found actually hasn't been coffee. It hasn't been alcohol. It was the histamines. Because there's so many, like, you mean avocados can be unhealthy for me? Like I have to give up avocado toast, and there's no rage like alcohol, like an avocado toast deprivation rage. Let me tell you, that is some peak rage right there. The histamine is by far the most confusing and frustrating I found for people, because there's so many quote healthy things that either have high histamine, increase innate histamine within the body, or block the histamine enzymes, like green tea, lemons and limes, apple cider vinegar, just this avocados, like that by far is the most frustrating. The other problems that I found that people have when, or struggles they have with this, is that they start panicking, like, oh, is this for life? Do I have to eat like? Oh my goodness, that was my next question. That was my next question. Yes. So here's what for life means. Okay, so your genetics are for life. That's kind of a thing, unless you're silly enough to inject CRISPR into your bicep. Go Google Russian CRISPR bicep. You'll regret so, but seed's been planted. So genes are for life, And so what I do with people is like, is this for life? The answer is your genes are fixed, yet they are flexible.
Mhm.
Genes are fixed, but they're flexible. So you have to know what your genetic playground boundaries are. Know the
Correct.
boundaries. Some boundaries, like mine, are really small.
Right. Sure.
Really, really small. Other people's are way bigger. They're the worst. Oh God, people are so frustrating to eat all these things. Anyway, I'm not bitter. You bitter? I'm not bitter. No one's bitter.
I could be bitter at times because of that, because I have a very small box myself,
Yeah.
Dr. Sam. Yes.
So we'll commiserate over some kombucha later.
Yeah, there you go. I was thinking of a bacon cheeseburger, you know?
That's very Fleischig of you. Anyway.
Yeah.
The audience didn't know what that word meant. Go ask your rabbi.
Yeah.
So what happens is I tell them, look, you've got a box, you have the information now, so you can't eat things out of ignorance anymore. That's personal responsibility. I know it's frustrating,
Sure.
but now you know. And here are some strategies to mitigate, because your genes are like a dimmer switch that can dial up and dial down. So here's some strategies. Like if you're going to a higher carb experience, it's a birthday party, it's a social event, traveling, or whatever it may be. Here's a couple strategies you can do to temporarily increase your carb tolerance. And I mean temporarily. You can boost it temporarily, but then it comes back down to baseline. Some people's baseline is here, like me, and others are like way up here, which is
right.
So I can temporarily do boop, 1-2 hours, it'll temporarily boost, and then it'll just come back down. So here's some strategies to mitigate that. And this is also where things like there is a place for travel-based supplementation for specific digestive needs. I don't want people to use them as a crutch, but like if people are going to go into a higher histamine environment or a much higher carb environment or whatever it might be, you can buffer by bringing in some nutritional nutrients to help you with those digestion. But the problem is that they may think they can just use that all the time, and that's a losing strategy. Just because you can figure out a way to detox alcohol faster doesn't mean damage from the alcohol while it's in there isn't being done.
Right. 100%. These are just, you know what, I like to, the audience likes to have these clinical pearls so that they can see, they can understand, these are positive lifestyle changes that we're making. And, you don't want to go back to the way you were before, because going back to the way you were before, oh, we're large again, going back to the way you were, that freaked me out for a second, going back to the way you were before will give you the same results. And something else that you said before, because a lot of people come into my office, Dr. Sam, it's like a red badge, of courage or something like that. I'm taking 20 supplements, so therefore I must be healthy. The most supplements in the day, wins, right?
Well, the asterisk, what are you basing those supplements on?
Right.
What labs?
Sure.
And what is the plan to wean off of them based on what parameters? There's definitely a place to doing high volume, high quality, targeted supplementation based on numbers, not based off of whatever the latest supplement magazine or podcast said, whatever the shiny new supplement syndrome.
Correct.
There's a place for that temporarily for a specific therapeutic need based on data. That I'm fine with.
Absolutely.
As long as you're monitoring as well. But
shiny new supplement. That was great. Syndrome. I love that. I have to write that down. I got to use that.
It's a terminal syndrome. Just it's terminal.
Yeah, I like that. Dr. Sam, we're almost done with the podcast. It goes fast, right? So if you were to give three clinical pearls, what would you say to the audience today?
Sorry, the term pearl is so funny to me. It's like when you think about the clinical pearls, like what is, because you think about how pearl is made, you actually take the metaphor down to bottom. It's like, what is the most irritating thing I could tell you about that's just going to sit there and grow into something?
Eat at you. Eat at
What's
you.
the most annoying thing that is healthy for you?
All right, three call to actions to help somebody out. How's that? Is that better?
My literal mind is not so up in arms here. So the three actions: number one, work with a professional. I may know a lot about a subject, but if I don't do it every day for 2 decades as professionally, I need to ask for help from someone, because it's going to save me in the long term a lot of time, a lot of money, and get me way faster results. It's an investment that has way higher returns for the long term, even though the short-term investment in time, money, energy, and other resources may be higher at the outset. Number two, stop hating your body.
Yeah, I love
Stop
that.
hating. And that was one of the real gifts of studying genetics. And I'm serious about that. When I got my genetics back, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. Like when I got my genetics back, I cried for an hour. I was a mixture of relief and grief, both.
Right.
And I stopped hating my body.
Right.
I remember waking up at 3 a.m. for years on the dot, this is the crippling insomnia. I'm waking up and I literally was yelling at my body. What do you want from me? Like, what, like just like this is othering, this antagonistic. It was like my body was in some sort of weird codependent relationship where my body would gaslight me. Like sometimes it would behave great, other times it would just slap me down and give me no explanation. And I had to figure out what it was like. It was this terrible relationship. And when I discovered my genes, and I was like, oh, all things trade-offs. Oh, okay, low carb genetically because of that, and I'm a hyper-inflamer genetically because if I'm hyper pro-inflammatory as a hunter-gatherer, if I'm ever bit, gored, mauled, or trampled hunting a giant animal with a tiny stick, my exuberant inflammatory response will heal the tissue damage from a bite wound and kill the infection faster than my less inflammatory prone hunting party member. So Absolutely. The trade-off was higher inflammation means more reliable short-term survival at the expense of long-term survival. And the reverse is true for my friend who would likely die more quickly in the hunting party, but has a longer-term survival potential, all things trade-off. So that really, truly helped me stop me hating my body. Additionally, understanding this therapeutic barbed wire thing completely broke this, my body cannot make up, can't pick a lane on a diet. And I realized like, no, it's just responding because it's dealing with what it's got. It's not doing this to personally persecute you.
Right, sure.
So that's the second thing. Just you can stop hating your body because the body's truly trying to do the best with what it's got. The third thing I would say is get your genetics tested. Just like seriously, just set the foundation, figure that piece out. Everything else is layered on top of that. Figure the genetics out. That's something that I do. If people are interested, I have an entire guide that one page people saw was just one page out of the whole guide that explains how to determine your optimal diet. And people can get that. It's just on my website, drsamshay.com. It's the opening thing. They can click on it. You opt in. Everyone's used to this now. You click on the thing, you get the PDF, you've opted in, etc. And you'll be on my newsletter. You'll get cute pictures of my French bulldog. You see some of my comedy clips. You'll get more nerdy health information, etc.
All right. So drsamshay.com. That's where people can find you.
Correct. drsamshay.com.
That'll be in the show notes so that they can help you out. So listen, for everybody who wants to know more, Dr. Sam is a science nerd as I am. So, we look at this stuff and we study it all day long, all night long. If I wake up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, I start studying and, I just start doing that stuff. It just absorbs your life because you want to serve humankind. So Dr. Sam, thank you very much for being on today. You're going to send me a link so we can get another one going in about a month because we're going to talk gut health next time.
You mean next year? We're going to aim for once every 9
months? Maybe 2024 or something.
Schedule for next month, but plan on next year. That's what I'm hearing.
Next year. No, it's all good. We're ready to go. So okay. Dr. Sam, thank you very much for being on today. Great information. Loved it. I have a whole set of notes. They're going to put it into the show notes. It's going to be great. This is going to go out next week because we want everybody, we love to motivate, educate, and inspire. I want to thank everybody for listening today. Live your best life. Until the next time, Dr. Sam, thank you very much for being on today.
Thanks so much.
Take care.